I think pass it over to Bruce here. Get going. Bruce, you should have the puck there. Let me know if that worked out. Started here. Very good.
Playing now?
Yes, I've got you. Weston, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear both you guys great.
Great. Well, I'm sure we'll have some folks trickling in here as we get started, but I don't want to keep anybody that's ready to go at 1 o'clock here. So thanks everybody for joining. This would be the 5th webinar in our Sodick and Friends webinar series here. We're very excited to have Bruce Courtney from NuTec Tooling Systems and Automation here to present for us today. We've had a lot of success with the previous 4 webinars, like I said. Some stuff on scientific molding for those of you who missed it with FemTech and Orbital Plastics Consulting went really, really well. The idea here is just to kind of work with all of our, friends, as you see there, or vendors and partners and things like that to, spread some knowledge within the injection molding world that we all live in here. So, again, some scientific molding stuff went really well for us. A partner of ours, Conair, did a presentation on ultra low dosing equipment, and then a quality system from a company, MKS, called SenseLink for kind of quality monitoring at the press. Upcoming webinars here, and then we'll get started real quick. But upcoming, we've got Beaumont Technologies, some more scientific molding related training. And then some really cool presentations from Matrix Tool, isometric micromolding, MTD micromolding, and a couple materials manufacturers on some kind of unique LCP materials and I believe bioresorbables as well. So stay tuned for all that. That will be in the next, I think every other week here for the next few months. So with that, in a second, I will pass over to Weston Harbaugh to talk through Q&A and how we manage that. But I want to introduce our man of the hour here, Bruce Courtney from NuTec. Bruce is a good friend of all of ours here at Sodick, and we're very excited to have him on. We worked together on numerous projects. Everything from off-the-shelf automation to very, very small, really unique end-of-arm tooling, kind of complex systems. So the capabilities are all there. Bruce has been in the automation world designing and delivering this stuff for over 20 years. So again, very excited to have him here. And I do want to shout out our national sales manager, Len Hampton, as well. He sort of sponsored this whole thing and has been promoting this Sodick and Friends webinar series. So thanks for joining. I'm going to kick over to Weston Harbaugh here, Regional Sales Manager for the East Coast for us here at Sodick. He's going to just give us a couple logistical things, as far as question and answer and how to manage all that. So with that, Weston, thank you.
All right, thanks, Bennett. Really appreciate that. As Bennett mentioned, we're going to reserve a little bit of time at the end of the presentation here for questions and answers. In the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a Q&A area or the chat function. If you will direct all those questions to the host, as Bruce wraps this up today, we'll go into those questions. I'll present them to Bruce and allow him to answer for everyone. Again, thank you very much for joining us, and for those that have joined before or keep your eyes open for the future ones, we really appreciate it. And Bruce, I guess with that, it's all yours, man.
Thank you, Wes. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Let me offer my own personal welcome to the webinar series. It's a nice opportunity to get together. We talked about automation and how best to present this, and we recognize that we have a diversity of experiences when it comes to automation, varying from somewhat limited experiences up to some very involved experiences by those who are listening. So with this in mind, what we thought we might do is just work down through a automation program, a process, and kind of cover it from beginning to end. And some of this might seem a little basic, a little bit redundant, but I think you'll find that as we move along, you'll see that we get more and more complex, and we'll have some nice examples as we progress as well to help you see what automation can really do for you. So from an agenda standpoint, we'll kind of walk down through several steps here. We'll kind of answer the initial question of why automation, obviously a hot topic nowadays, how best to plan for success and move a project forward. We also would like to touch base a little bit on RFQs and proposal expectations. How best to structure that for your selection of vendors and how best to evaluate those proposals. Once you've launched a project, how we look at the various project tools and milestones that are available nowadays. And then we'll spend a little bit of time looking at the various examples and the creative solutions that are out there. Some great technology, some neat things that happen every day that we can take a look at. And then as Wes mentioned, we'll move on to the questions and answers. It's not uncommon for us to receive a call from a variety of different folks concerning automation. And perhaps the first question is, why automate? And certainly one of the big motivators for businesses today is to protect those profits. With automation, the cost of operation year after year remains much more consistent. It also allows you to more accurately understand your production cost and allows you to make decisions going forward in a more confident manner. It can also provide a competitive advantage. It helps all of us as manufacturers to remain competitive within the global market. We've been involved with numerous projects that are doing just that, perhaps reshoring a project in order to stay competitive within the environment that we live in now. It also helps with cost avoidance, whether it be with scrap or non-conformances. Certainly you don't want things getting clear to the customer level, but it's very important that we look and we can inspect and re-inspect to make sure that we know what we're shipping day in, day out, and therefore we can have consistent quality control, that consistent output that we need as manufacturers. And then naturally also that risk mitigation aspect. How do we remove the human error that's often in the manufacture of our product? How do we verify that we have what we think we have? Do we need documentation or record keeping? Each of those are especially important, but it also allows us to make sure that our end customer gets what they bargained for. And naturally also it supports growth as we continue to launch new programs, new projects. That's an important part of automation nowadays. We'll take a little closer look at that as well. So perhaps for new launches, one of the advantages of automation for new launches is very commonly today is that you can have concurrent engineering. Whether you're coming out with a new product or your next generation product, that product often is still in a state of flux as it moves from your R&D group and starts to move towards the actual production. And automation allows you to have concurrent engineering of the automation with the actual product itself. It allows you to get an earlier start, to get to market sooner. It also allows you to identify and design checkpoints and to make sure that you know exactly what it is you need. There may be pilot runs involved. Very common nowadays that some low volume pilot runs are necessary for evaluation. Naturally, automation, I guess the name alone implies that it was typically a lot of volume, a higher output. And again, as we mentioned before, that cost control, it helps give you predictable costing. Now, one of the elements of cost control also is the combining of processes. And we'll look forward to that as we look at some examples of press side or packaging. We'll look at some of those examples going forward. But as you tie more and more of your processes together, the better prediction you have of maintaining your cost control. And naturally, quality assurance is always in there. The making sure that you have 100% inspection. One of the areas that's very common nowadays is a functional inspection also, where you may actuate the product, you may actually move it through its motions in some particular manner to verify that not only is it assembled correctly, but also that it functions for the end user. And naturally, data records are very common, especially in the medical or pharmaceutical industry. You also may have automation involved with enhancements, as we mentioned. Often this is the next generation. Perhaps it's a new product size, or you need to upgrade the controls, or perhaps you want to add additional processes to what's taken place on the product itself. Very commonly, we get invited to step into a current automation cell and add to it, enhance it, change it in a function to meet the new requirements. Again, those same aspects of quality assurance, having that consistent inspection is a big part of enhancements. Modern day technology with vision systems and laser systems and some of the new hardware that's available allows us to greatly improve the quality assurance of product being manufactured today. And as we mentioned on the cost control, sometimes that enhancement is tied to a reshoring, bringing back the product to avoid shipment costs or delays, sometimes to improve quality. You know, there's a variety of different things that can be added to an existing piece of equipment to, again, help with cost control. You know, one of the main items we need to talk about is planning for success. Obviously, that's what we all try to do, but it's very, very important to take the time at the beginning of a project to coordinate those inputs, to look for the outputs. What are the receivables you want to have when it's all said and done? To distinctly look at the various processes that are necessary. Some of these processes you may already have running in your plants. Some of these processes may be something new for this new product. The product design itself, as we mentioned before, may be happening concurrently, but it's important nowadays to look at how you manufacture your product. From an automation standpoint, sometimes something as simple as a 5-thou chamfer on a part can make all the difference on how well the automation works. And naturally, safety is a key aspect to make sure that everything is controlled and safe for the operators and for those working around the automation. And again, you're looking at your costs. What is your budget? What's your ROI as you go forward? You know, one of the ways that perhaps helps you do that is to identify those inputs and those outputs. I think we're all pretty much familiar with flow charts, but this is just kind of a typical simple flow chart. You know, you need to ask yourself and ask your team what it is that we want to do. What processes are we trying to do? Sometimes this will start off with a very short flow chart, and as you work down through it, you realize you're doing a whole lot more things than you thought you were. There's a whole lot more inspection that needs to take place, and you're going to fill in the flow chart, and you're going to grow the flow chart so that you know what processes you need, what inspection points you need, exactly what it is you'd like to have. Now, once you have ways of communicating what it is that you'd like to have built for automation is a user requirement specification, a URS. There's some other acronyms out there for variations of this, but effectively it is intended to pass on the entire package that you want to have, what it is you need to have automated. This is a typical table of contents. As you can see, it covers everything from some basic logistics, clear through what the performance requirements are, regulatory standards, certainly cycle time. How many do you need a year? And in what fashion? How many hours a day do you plan on running? How many days a week? Often there's a large section on design features. These are typically your default specifications. Are there particular brands that your facility prefers to use? Are there methods of control wiring that you want to make sure are included? What level of cleanliness? Is this a clean room application or a steel mill application? It covers the entire spectrum. And then as we get to the actual flow chart, that's going to roll you directly into the design that you need to actually be able to design the custom automation. What it is that you're looking for. What are you dispensing lubricants? Are you ultrasonically welding? Are you packaging? Whatever those elements are, they need to be spelled out with some level of detail. The final acceptance, the installation requirements, warranty, all those things all should be covered as part of the URS. Once you've established that URS, you're going to send it out to your selection of vendors, automation houses that are going to help you take care of your pain point. Those items that you want to make sure that you include, if at all possible, obviously the user specification that we just talked about, that's something that certainly that the vendor will need to do a good job. Attached to that, very likely, are going to be appendixes of drawings and details. They're going to need to know dimensions and tolerances, even the assembly methodologies. Is there glue involved? What may take place? And then your vendor is going to appreciate getting samples as well, if at all possible. As engineers, we always like to touch things. So getting those samples and being able to manipulate them and decide how best to handle them is a portion of what the application engineers are going to do at your vendor's facility. Also, those same samples may be set to feeder bowl companies or other folks who need to support it, maybe even some pre-inspection with vision systems to verify what we can see and not see as they work to solve the issues that you have at hand. Always encourage as well an opportunity for discussion, to follow up with each of your vendors and make sure they have the opportunity to ask questions. It also gives you the opportunity to emphasize those points that are most important to you. Wherever you sit, there's always a area of expertise that you have, and each of us see it differently from where we sit in the equation. So being able to share those, and also for your vendor to share their questions and concerns, it's an important way of working down through and making sure you get the best quotation you can. Naturally, a timeline for the quote and also for the project. Is this going to happen this year, or is it for the fourth quarter next year? Those type of questions are going to come up very quickly. Process details. The automation cell is very likely made up of just a series of processes. They can be generally just material handling ones like feeding a part, or they can be highly involved like 3D laser scanning. Whatever that process is, some of those some of those may need prototype, some of those you may be working on currently. Those type of details need to be spelled out to help your vendor understand what it is you need done. And one of the areas that we always encourage as well is what validation protocols you plan to enact. How do you plan to verify at the factory acceptance test? How do you verify that the machine is running? What are those milestones to make sure that those are all addressed early on? Once you've sent those out to any number of vendors, some you may know, some may be new, as you start through the proposal review. And sometimes this can be a somewhat daunting task. You're going to ask yourself first is, how does the proposal stack up against the URS? The various elements that you detailed that you would like to have addressed, were they addressed in the proposal? Sometimes it's as basic as that. Often we encourage the use of concept drawings like the example shown. Those concept drawings go a long ways to helping you understand just what it is that the customer is envisioning, or the vendor is envisioning. And likewise, ask yourself, did they do their homework? Did they build your confidence? Whether that be they did some additional inspection testing, they evaluated the process, perhaps they were proactive and they actually helped you make a few suggestions on how to redesign your product to make it more effective. Each one of those gives you an idea of how much they've bought into your project and how forward they come in helping you solve your problem. Now, some of the selection considerations that go beyond dollars and schedules is working down through what I call apples and oranges. You will most likely get a variety of different approaches, different concepts on how to do the automation. Trying to work down through that comparison can be somewhat tough sometimes. Whether you use a spreadsheet or your team can work down through and make those comparisons, make those judgments. Don't ever hesitate to ask questions to make sure you understand what is being presented to you. But often you're going to have apples and oranges to compare. And one of the things that we always like to call the wow factor is look to see which proposal actually really caught your eye, something unique, like made a different twist, a different turn, a way to reduce cost, a way to improve efficiency. You look for that wow factor. What did each of the vendors do to make sure that they own your product as well? What are they doing? It's your baby. You've been carrying it for a long time. Which one of them is ready to take on your project? I mentioned the different apples and oranges. I'll just make a comment here. There's a lot of different equipment platforms available nowadays, and there's a whole variety of different chassis styles that are used commonly in industry. It can be as basic as a power and free conveyor system, which essentially moves the product from station to station and stops at each station for another process or two to be added. Or maybe synchronous inline or rotary indexers. Press side automation is a very common aspect used today to optimize tying together various processes. And we'll take a look at some of those as we go forward. It might be continuous rotary motion, or perhaps it's just a dedicated robotic cell, one or more robots working in a cell to do the work that you need done. And naturally, there's always semi-automatic workstations with operators more heavily involved, or lean work cells. One of the other elements that we highly recommend you take a look at when you're reviewing your proposals are the controls themselves. What have they identified for you for control engineering? Control engineering is a significant part of automation nowadays. If you go back 20 years, perhaps 15 or 20 years, you would most likely find that most automation houses had more mechanical engineers than electrical engineers. Nowadays, you're going to see that that's pretty much flipped to be the opposite. Most of the time, you're going to have more electrical engineers than mechanical engineers. That's simply where technology has taken us, whether it be more sophisticated PLCs, servo drives, robots, vision systems, data collection. All those elements tap into the skill set of electrical engineering. Those same folks are the ones who take care of the electrical, pneumatic, hydraulic design. They need to cover the PLCs and the motion control. As I mentioned, the vision or data acquisition. They're the ones that I call them wizards, because it's amazing what is done nowadays as they work down through making the automation sing. So you made your selection. Now it's time for project launch. To move forward. It's an exciting time. The milestone has been met. And there's some various project-based tools that we always encourage. Most likely you're going to have kickoff meetings between your team and the automation house team. It's, again, an opportunity to share what's most important to you and what needs to take place. Very commonly, the tools that are used include Gantt charts and updates, whatever interval that may be, weekly, bi-weekly. We encourage the use of those updates. It's important to have transparency between you and your vendor, to understand that you see each aspect through each other's eyes. And the Gantt charts and the updates help you do that. You may have designed for manufacturability reviews, you may have PFMEAs, different tools that are used to help make sure that you have the best piece of equipment you can have. Certainly risk assessments are a big part of automation nowadays, as well as the mechanical and electrical interface. There's a linked arm approach to both mechanical and electrical to make sure that the equipment runs smoothly. You may have special requirements like CE facilitation. In order to get that CE mark, what steps need to take place? It's a big portion of the FAT. Perhaps there's a third party to come in to actually do the testing in order to validate the system for CE. And again, all those validation protocols. Again, I emphasize, that you want to make sure that you have a chance to start discussing those and start moving forward with what that validation plan is going to look like. Very often there's a project manager involved for both teams. It provides a single source project manager that is our liaison between your team and their team, kind of the facilitator, the guide to help you make sure that communications are taking place effectively. They're responsible for those written status reports and as well as for the planning, the schedule, making sure that everyone is on course. They also organize and maintain all that project documentation. But project management is a key aspect to make sure that the program goes forward smoothly. Assembly and factory acceptance. I know it's about the fourth time I've said it, but plan early. It's very important to identify what that validation protocol is going to be, what that inspection, what challenge parts you might need, what testing you might need. What do you need to make sure you can verify that the automation cell is performing as you expect. The sooner you get that into the mix, clear back in the design state, it should be all part of the mix, and that needs to be planned early. So we'll take a few moments here and look at some examples of various automation solutions and work our way up to some very creative ones as well. We talk about automation. Obviously, a lot of automation is customized to a particular application, but there is a lot of out-of-box automation available in the marketplace as well. And as we all know, there's no use reinventing the wheel if it's already out there. So it's very common to use various styles of automation that's available. A couple of examples here that are shown, whether it be packaging or putting lids on items or different types of closures. There's a whole variety of packaging and I'll call it out-of-the-box automation. They can typically be a little bit customized, but largely they're predefined what their capabilities are. And there's a great variety that will help you to move forward. As perhaps it's your first taste of automation, but it can certainly help you move forward and produce your product in a more efficient manner. You also then kind of take the next step of automation. The next step of automation is a predefined cell, such as the example we have here, where you start with a predefined cell of automation. This one happens to be a tray handling system. This tray handling system can take product from a tray and put it into a process, or perhaps take a product from a process and put it into a tray. You can also add additional pre or post processes as the robot works as well. And this type of automation, the advantage here is the fact that the base unit is still pre-designed, but it has the capability of having customized end-of-arm tools, some portion of it that will allow you to be customized to your particular product, so that you're only partially customized effectively. A whole variety of different types of pre-designed automation on the market today. And as we work from there, we'll move forward towards more custom solutions. Sometimes the custom solution may start off still relatively small, relatively simple. And these can be lean workstations. Often these are used, they may be semi-automatic where an operator is still involved. They provide for low volume output. Low volume in automation terms nowadays maybe a few 100,000 parts a year up to 1 million parts a year. and also the prototyping. It's not uncommon to use some initial prototyping cells to help you define a particular process before you move to a high volume automation cell. From here, you may move into some smaller automation cells, excuse me. You know, this particular cell is a small inline. It indexes a product moving through, adding sealant, UV curing, doing inspection, and so forth. This one's always seems to get attention. This particular machine actually handled hand grenade handles. And it just seemed like everybody wanted their own personal sample of the hand grenade handle. And, you know, there's a variety of different applications for automation out there. Some semi-automatic cells where an operator still is used to move the product from station to station. This is a little older one, but whether it be ultrasonic welding, vacuum leak test, an operator is still involved. But what you get here is a means to control your processes more accurately. You may have a final inspection station that does 100% inspection hands-off, which again helps you elevate the quality standards of your product as it leaves your facility. It could be material handling systems. This particular cell was actually making rungs for aluminum ladders, some very high-speed equipment, multiple cells that are actually used as part of a light industrial application. Then from here, we kind of move to more advanced custom solutions. You know, automation can take a lot of different shapes and forms. And this is just a view of a high-speed assembly line. In actuality, this is only about half the line. You can see that there are numerous cells of automation all tied together as the product moves forward. This type of automation is very common in industry today. Very sophisticated, very fast, high volume. And automation, it's largely, to oversimplify, it's tying all those process blocks that you put on your flow chart, tying those together until you get a complete line from beginning to end of what you need. Continuous motion equipment. Continuous motion equipment typically runs without stopping, just as it implies, where you're assembly, testing, doing a whole variety of different things, same processes, but at a much higher rate so that the equipment never stops. Outputs on continuous motion can go from a few hundred parts a minute up to 2,000 parts a minute. Just an example of running in slow-mo here, where you're actually doing the assembly of the product. You're also, as you can see by the strobe light, you're actually doing inspection of it. The machine itself is doing all the processes we talked about, but it does it in a continuous motion. As Bennett mentioned early on, often it's involved with some very ultra small, ultra precision assembly work, a variety of equipment. This may be involved with medical or clean room. You know, medical and clean room equipment typically has its own protocol of how it's designed, how it's manufactured, not just the materials as you see here, more stainless steel, but methodologies of how you actually assemble the equipment. You may have more pre-inspection, in-process inspection, and post-inspection as the product moves forward, whatever those requirements are for the particular application. You know, one of the areas that continues to evolve and move forward very quickly are the high-tech vision systems that are used today. These vision systems can be incorporated in a large array of different styles. They can look at the outside or the inside of a bottle, all from one point with some of the fancy optical lenses that are available today. They can use 3D lasers to combine with the vision system so that we can do bin picking. There's just a whole variety of different vision systems that are used. Mounted to robots, mounted dedicated, all of those are used continuously nowadays. So that extends to the point of vision-guided robot, an area that's progressed quite well over the last 5 to 10 years. The vision system is able to identify the product and give coordinates to the robot to pick it properly. We had a product not too long ago that had a little pin sticking up off one side of the product. It was only 60 thou tall, very small little bump on one side of the product. And we had to pick it in one orientation. The vision system was able to accurately identify that and make sure that the robot only picked those that were oriented correctly. And I know we all read lots of articles and we see lots of examples of collaborative robots nowadays, robots that are able to work side by side with a human. By controlling the speed and the forces, they can work side by side and not present a safety hazard for the humans. It makes for some very unique applications for those. The actual operating speeds are typically less than what you're going to find with other robots, but in the right application, they're a wonderful tool as well. You also have various press side automation as well. I talk about different processes. Well, you want to take a look at those processes upstream and downstream. You want to take a look at what is happening before the automation cell, what's happening after it. This particular application shows the insertion of components into a molding press. As you watch it, you can kind of see the robot as it articulates to pass through what are the imaginary tie bars on the press on this particular mock-up. The press isn't actually there, but as you can see, the robot moves through the tie bars and interfaces with the mold. At least this type of automation is very common. It's a specialty of NuTec as well. But the opportunity is to take a look to see where do you need to have the automation cell go, before and afterwards, even if you just tie it to packaging downstream. Broaden your view to see how much you can actually tie together. And then you can get very creative. As you get more and more familiar with automation, you realize there's a lot of very creative things that you can do. A lot of it just simply still comes down to the building blocks that we talked about earlier, of taking each process and daisy chaining those processes together, looking for areas of improvement, of efficiency, and together you can tie together for a very robust system through that vision. This particular cell, you can see, is interfacing directly with the Sodick molding press in the background. But out front, we see this choreographed dance that the three robots are doing together. Whatever they may be doing, whether they're inspecting, whether they're packaging, whether they're doing welding, whatever the case may be, you tie these together and you can build a very nice compact cell that will do all these functions, directly interfacing with the molding press, perhaps downstream, directly interfacing with packaging.
Hey, Bruce.
Yes.
Real quick there, that last video didn't show, I don't believe, for the attendees here viewing it. So maybe if we could try to run that again.
All right. How about, is it showing now?
I'm unable to see it anyhow.
That's
yeah, it's not showing up.
that's unfortunate.
It's all right.
Yeah, let me just back up and just come into it one more time just to see. We'll give it one more try. It's running now. Any signs?
I'm not seeing it again. So, but I guess go ahead and move on here.
Yep. Yep. Sorry about that, folks.
No worries.
We also have a variety of different applications that maybe medical areas as well. I mentioned earlier that on some of the lean work cells, sometimes there's a process that needs defined, as perhaps we show in the upper left-hand view, where there are some processes you want to further develop, And then as they are developed, then they can move into the directly into the automation cell. A very common approach. Is this video playing okay?
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Good. All right. Yeah, so you see that migration. It's very common to have that migration as you develop a product and can work down through that. Clean room applications are common as well. Various levels of clean room and some of the cells that are put into clean rooms. It can be a medical device assembly. It can be electronics. Different things end up in clean rooms. A different type of work that you may do. And even pharmaceutical device processing. You can see in these particular cells, each and every cell itself has a HEPA filter built into it, maintain a higher class of clean room integrity within the actual cell itself, and a variety of different approaches taken here as well. One of the most important things to emphasize, and I think we all recognize it, is making sure that we hitch your wagon to the right folks. I encourage you to make sure that you feel the synergy between your team and the team of the vendor that you select. Everyone has their own level of expertise and skill set, and making sure that together you can link arms. Together you're going to make the best automation cell you can, working together as you work down through the particular project. Some of the folks that we often deal with, just a few sampling of some names here that you can trust. These folks are always good for automation and do a great job of supporting us. But it's important because we all know that anyone who's been through the automation world recognizes there's some twists and some turns, some variability as you work through a project. And it's not the fact you have a hiccup, it's how you handle that hiccup that's most important. And together you can do wonderful things. You ask yourself, how do you measure success? How do you know a job is well done? I think, well, it really comes down to your customers. Now, whether your customers are internal, the folks at the production facility, your manager, the engineer, or whether it be the external customers, as in our case, our end customers, getting their comments back on how the automation cell is working is simply very critical and key. And that's a great way to measure success. Are you meeting your targets, your expectations, your production requirements, your quality requirements? As you check off the boxes, the bottom of the line is when your end customer says, good job. And with that, I'd like to thank each of you for listening to the presentation. Hopefully it was helpful and you picked up a few tidbits as you worked down through that. I want to thank Sodick especially for the opportunity to address each of you. And with that, if we can move on to the question and answer session. If there's any questions.
Great, Bruce. Thank you. We have a few questions here already, so this is great. Let's start with this question just came in. Can you build a system that is already designed with completed drawings, or does NuTec only focus on custom applications?
No, we focus on most of those applications. We call it build to print packages, and we also call it design and build for the custom work. So no, we can build directly to the print package you already have. And as I mentioned, it's not uncommon to have some enhancements that are being included at that time also. But we're glad to take a look at that.
Great. I guess this kind of builds off that a little bit. It says, how much of NuTec's business is focused on building automation for the medical device or the pharma industries?
That's a good question. We probably, is roughly probably around 50% of our work specializes in areas that are related to medical or pharma, more so medical. And again, I use that kind of loosely because sometimes you're 2 or 3 tiers away. It may be a portion of what ultimately ends up in a medical device, and perhaps not directly. but often there is a connection there with the equipment we build. And we also cover a large spectrum. I'll mention everything from electronics to light industry. One classification we use is a green industry, whether it be energy dependent, which picks up everything from, I can think not too long ago, we had some equipment go through that was fusing together underground pipeline fittings and so forth. So it was all tied to the natural gas industry. So you pick up some of the renewable energy projects as well.
Wonderful. Here, one just came in. Keep the questions coming, guys. This is great. For a company that is just starting to add automation to its production workflow, and we don't yet have the support staff in place, is it possible for a company like NuTec to debug or investigate any issues remotely?
It is. That's one of the beauties of modern day hardware is you can usually dial in on a VPN. Our electrical engineering staff can actually see what you see. If the machine's having a hiccup or something that way, we recognize that the most important thing to you is getting your production out. So getting the machine back up and running as quickly as possible is paramount. So nowadays, again, it doesn't necessarily require a service trip. If we can dial in, working with your people, interfacing, and identify the issue, solve the issue from afar, that's one type of service call that is very common nowadays, and it gets you back running sooner.
Excellent. Will NuTec integrate the injection molding machines on site? Will you integrate with them at our facility or the customer's facility, I should say?
We do that. A lot of the integration of injection molding is often done at our facility. The reason we prefer that approach is the ability to actually completely integrate the automation cell to the molding process. It's not uncommon to actually inspect the work going into or out of the molding press, and that way you can make sure that you're all tied together. So probably the vast majority of that style of work that we do does include bringing the press to our facility. We do have to address the issue of operating the press and the liability of the mold and so forth, but it makes for a cleaner system. It also allows that when you get to the end of the project and you're ready for your factory acceptance test, you're actually running the entire cell so that you can actually qualify it before shipping it to your facility. That said, on larger applications, we also integrate at your facility as well.
Excellent. Here's a great question, Bruce. Do you build semi-automated systems, and is it possible to upgrade the system to turn it into fully automated when demand dictates?
That's a good question. We do. We kind of term that as a phased approach. And if you know your volume is going to grow, we can grow with you. The most important thing is to identify that early on so we can see how best to accomplish that task. So it may start off with a operator involved. It may start off with a limited number of stations. And as long as we have it in our peripheral vision as we design the cell, we can also add the capability of adding additional stations or additional features to that line and years forward. And that way you can grow, the line itself can grow as your output grows and your requirements grow.
Wonderful. Does NuTec have any international experience, Bruce?
We do. We have equipment in 14, 15 different countries, at least around the world. I will say that, for the most part, we don't market ourselves that way. Most of the time we're tied to domestic offices, corporate offices, and the equipment might end up in Belgium or wherever it may be, and our staff can support it there. We can travel there for the installation. So we do find ourselves in different countries around the world. A couple of years back, we had some gentlemen who ended up in Mongolia, and they thought it was a wonderful country. It was tough getting to and getting home from, but once they were there, they enjoyed their stay there as well. So it's interesting, some of the places we find ourselves.
Very good. We're to the end of the questions so far. If there's any further, please submit them here through the Q&A section or the chat section for Bruce. And we'll just give it another minute or so here to see if there's any further questions.
Maybe while we wait, I had a question myself here, Bruce, just more curious than anything. What's you talk about millions, maybe hundreds of millions of parts per year being quoted. What's maybe a scenario or an example of something really fast? How many assemblies per minute or something like that you guys have done? I'm curious.
That's a good question. I'll comment at both ends of that spectrum. A few years back, we did a light industrial application that we always teased was the slowest application we ever did. The entire assembly, which included cryogenics and all types of laser scanning and so forth, that entire, from beginning to end, that cell took 5 minutes to make one of the products. And the customer was absolutely overjoyed because prior to that time, it took them 4.5 man-hours to actually do the equivalent. And so for them, it was a giant jump. We always chuckle that it was the slowest piece of automation we ever did. It also was a very large, heavy piece, so it's understandable. At the same time, you go to the other end of the spectrum, and nowadays it's very common. We regularly see automation cells at NuTec that are heading for 800 to 1,000 parts a minute. Within the industry, you can easily get up to 1,500, 2,000 parts a minute, doing an array of different processes. Effectively, at the end of the line, you see what looks like a waterfall coming off. They're coming at you so fast. And those type of capabilities have all migrated to that type of level over the last 25 years. Some very fast lines. Any other questions?
I do. We had a follow-up one here. What do you expect customer to maintain your automation? Does a customer, need special automation engineer, or how would they go about that?
That's good. That's also a very good question. No, it is very important that you have folks who are able to maintain the equipment. Like any piece of equipment, it does need some tender loving care from time to time. And so we encourage that you have automation technicians involved. At the same time, as we look at a particular project, sharing candidly, transparently with us what your capabilities are, we can help give some guidance to that. We can even perhaps change our design. For example, if robots are kind of unknown, you may or may not want to step into a robot application. At the same time, if you do, most of the robot manufacturers offer training classes, and we would highly recommend that you get folks up to speed on the robot. And that applies to a lot of the different technology out there, is we try to fit it to your application. But certainly at the end of the day, you need to have someone who owns it, that is there to take care of the automation cell.
Wonderful. I guess while we take a moment here and see if there's further questions to come in, want to reiterate what Bennett had mentioned earlier with a few more upcoming webinars. Looks like we're scheduled pretty thick here through October. Next, we're looking at Beaumont Technologies coming the 19th of August, followed by Isometric Sumitomo Materials, a great presentation on some LCP material. Foster Corporation, which is going to be presenting on implantables and bioabsorbable materials, as well as MTD micromolding coming up here in October. So doesn't look like there's any further questions, Bruce. So with that said, I'd like to give a thank you to everyone. One last chance here, but for questions, but let's say a huge thank you, Bruce, to you for taking time today and presenting on NuTec's automation.
Certainly, I'm glad to help out. We're always glad to help out any way we can.
Wonderful. With that, I guess we'll sign off. Again, thank you everybody for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you down the road. Take care.
Thanks, Bruce.
Right,
Thanks,
thank you.
everybody.
Mhm.